A famous European band once wrote a song and said, money, money, money. And of course, keep dancing. Welcome to Chaps, Many Cultures, episode 112. And as we do in our work, we work with a lot of people that are moving around the world. And of course, when you move, your money moves with you, or perhaps not. Perhaps it all can't move with you. And there are certain considerations we have to take into account. And we've got someone today that's going to tell us what we might have to think about when we do that. Stick around. Yes, welcome back, folks. A show about the business of culture and the culture of business. I don't ever remember which way I did that, which way is the right way around to say that, but it's both applicable. Welcome, everybody.
Money, money, money. You can say that from the front and the back. And my Swedish friends will be very happy you made that reference. There we go. For those of you who don't know, we won't tell you, but you can put your guess in who sang that. Money, money, money. Put it in the comment box. First one who gets it right gets I'll think about that, what you get.
Well, a two chaps t-shirt. How about that? When we eventually make them one day.
Yes. Yeah. Make sure you put your size in as well, so we send you the right size.
Absolutely.
So what about this money thing? You have any?
I try and keep a little bit in the side, but travel and all that kind of stuff. All the important things in life. We hope to keep a little bit of it, and everybody tries to keep a little bit of it. And we also may have stuff that we own, stuff that we want to keep, stuff that we want to take with us when we go on our little adventure around the world. It's important that we think of considerations when it comes to money, as we say. And, of course, I'm no expert when it comes to money. I don't know about you, young sir. I don't know.
Expert would be an exaggeration. I hope the colors remain black. I think that's the main thing that they told me in school, right? Make sure that the ink is black. So that whatever that means, I hope I hope I did that right. But I also heard that when you move around the world for work, money may not always follow you automatically, and you won't have access to your funds the same way you had before. Maybe your employer will tell you that your funds will be distributed differently than they were before. And I always thought that was like, who figures that stuff out? There's got to be some mastermind behind the scenes who's got the magic abacus and has that all figured out. So I think you know somebody, right?
Yes. Let's bring him on.
Okay. Here he is. All right. Here.
The thing about Brett, we'll get right from the start. He's an Aussie. His name is Brett, and he's from Queensland. And as that famous poet of our time, Meatloaf, said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. How are you, mate?
I'm well. I think it's a pretty hard act to follow, listening to you guys on. But look, long story short, can't complain because no one in my house ever listens anyway.
That's right. Very good. Well, welcome, sir.
Between two Aussie breads, I'm not sure how this is going to go, but all right. So when I say Brett, I mean the guy with the headphones. I'm not talking to you, Chicago Aussie. So headphones, Brett. You are sorry. You're based where in the world? Not in Australia, right?
We're based in the sandpit. We work out of Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, and we also have an office in Australia. So, working with clients in over 30 countries. The Western Hemisphere was a bit of a dark spot for us in terms of being able to service clients effectively. So we've actually cut the world in half just east of Mumbai. So now the Australian office looks after Asia and the United States. And I have the pleasure of working with clients from Mumbai through to London. So working with the States from Australia is quite easy because most people want to talk to you after hours. But working with clients in the UK, they want to call it midday, which is ungodly hour in Australia. So now we've virtually tried to demarcate ourselves. Expats it never ceases to amaze you where you find an expat. Every stone you unturn, if you hear a noise, someone having a party, someone's doing on, it's always an expat.
Yeah.
Of any nationality.
Someone doing an unruly thing, it's probably an expat. So,
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know you, because the two Bretts, apparently, if you haven't caught on to this, folks, these guys know each other, right? It's uncanny. Name, location.
Yeah.
Except
same
how
kind
can we
of
not know each other?
humor, wicked. So, Brett in the Emirates and Brett in Dubai. That's what I'm going to call you, Brett in Dubai.
Okay.
What makes you an expert on expat money?
I think it's, to me, twofold. So became an expat at 6 months of age, had the pleasure of moving to Tucson, Arizona. G'day to folks in Tucson or Tucson. Long story short, lived there for 5 years. Father was in the Air Force, came back to Australia, and then moved to Hong Kong. Dad moved there with the airlines. So I've always been in the expat ecosystem, and like I've always said, expats have a different vernacular, different traits, and all those sort of things. So one thing when you're dealing in a service business like ourselves is being able to understand your client base. The other thing is I've always worked in finance, and over the years, global regulation has really picked up. For managing your finances, the world is a very small place now. So repetitively, I was getting questions from colleagues and clients who are still overseas. I was back in Australia at the time, and they said, "We've got to help with this, help with this, help with this." So 2011, decided to leave a little firm called Citigroup and set up Atlas Wealth Management, and been doing it full time ever since.
Great.
That's fascinating. So that's your puppy then, or are you part of the founders?
No, I'm a founder and majority owner. So
Nice.
I had the pleasure of, walking the walk and talking the talk. It's the buck stops with me and my colleague James, who runs the Australian office. He's the other part owner, and to me, it's the sort of job where I guess it's not really a part-time role when it comes to keeping on top of regulatory changes and all those sort of things, because obviously we specialize in Australian expats, but for any nationality it's the same. The regulatory and tax landscape is changing constantly, and when you're providing financial advice, essentially it's two-dimensional advice. So think of someone like Brett going to talk to a financial advisor in Chicago. You're just talking about state laws and federal laws in the United States and how they pertain to US assets. When we talk to clients, we talked about assets that are held in Chicago and possibly Australia, and how those two work together with the IRS and the ATO, which 9 times out of 10 they don't. So it is like tapping your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time, because one will change, the other one will change. It's just this constant vortex of, as a lawyer, client always said, we don't like the status quo, and we don't live in a status quo world.
Money, finances are I mean, there are some people that probably say, money, it's just like, it's one of those things you hope that that sticks to you as you go through life, and that would be easy in your home. I know you work with, ostensibly concentrate on the Australian expat community, but in terms of just general, what do you see as common mistakes of people when they make before they leave, before they kind of push their boat off the shore? What are some of the common things that maybe people that's ubiquitous around the world?
Look, I think it's 3 things. The first thing is when they're researching that move overseas, finances is priority number 50 or 60. The first one is where they're going to live, where the kids are going to go to school, cool pubs in the area, restaurants, where they can travel to, a lot of the sexy stuff of moving overseas. And what they don't realize is when they jump on that plane, for any nationality, quite often your tax status changes, and so does that of your assets. Most people, when they do look at taking a move overseas, they've got something. They might have a house, they might have some super or foreign pensions saved up, might have some, ETFs or, cash.
Let me just translate there. Super for those
401k,
superannuation, like 401ks, retirement funds and stuff like that. Short.
And the biggest problem I think we find with it all is, the vast majority of residency tax laws for any country are incredibly outdated. So if you look at the Australian tax laws written in 1936, You go through and look at the residency test to qualify as a resident or non-resident for tax purposes. They use old-fashioned words like domicile and reside. United States is a classic example. The tax rules of the United States date back to the 1800s of a citizenship-based tax rule that follows you around the world. So even if you're in the place like Dubai, where I am, you still pay US tax like you would if you're in Chicago. And that actually dates back to Civil War days to stop people absconding. So, we're trying to dovetail in this modern world where we have, digital nomads and freelancers and everyone's traveling around the world. But the tax laws haven't caught up with that. And unfortunately, you do get a lot of unintended consequences as a result of that.
I've heard, and I'm not sure if this is just expat myths that are being thrown around, but I heard of U.S. expats abroad who were on longer assignments and they were fed up with paying that the same taxes that they were paying when they were still living in the U.S. That some of them rescinded their U.S. citizenship in order to avoid being double taxed. It's FICA, or what is it called? There's some
FATCA.
kind of
FATCA.
Is that just a rumor, or have you heard of incidences where U.S. citizens said, "Hey, I'm done with double paying. I'm being taxed here in my country of residence, and my passport country still wants money for me, even though I don't live there." Have you heard cases like that?
It is huge. It is huge. There's Facebook groups. There's the latest article I saw was what they call accidental Americans is probably the best way to describe it. And my brother's one of those. He was born in Tucson, Arizona. So even though he lived there until he's about 4 years of age and then moved back to Australia, he's an accidental American. Now, there was a case, I think it came out of Netherlands this week, suing the US government in terms of them not having to comply with FATCA. Boris Johnson, classic example. Boris was actually born in the United States. So when Boris sold his house recently, the IRS gave him a bill. And he said, this is ridiculous. But guess what? He actually ended up paying it because it's the law. People rescinding their US citizenship, the numbers are off the charts at the moment. I can't remember the exact numbers, and I'll come back to this later on and put some links into the comments with respect to the actual numbers. The numbers are record numbers of the amount of Americans or amount of US citizens or accidental Americans who are rescinding their US citizenship, because the biggest problem you find is people don't, I'm not saying they don't mind paying tax, but whatever's fair and equitable. And what we're seeing is people who may have lived in America from 1 to 3 years of age who are getting caught up in something they'd never set foot back in there as a resident anyway. And US and Eritrea are the only two countries in the world that apply a citizenship-based tax. Everyone else is residency-based. So there is a big call there, but at the moment, the IRS are getting a nice little extra bump in revenue. So why are they going to change it?
I mean, tax is one thing, but I think also if you're going abroad and you have, like you said, you have built up whatever level of wealth in your last country. I'm not saying it's your passport country, but wherever you were before, you may have built up some level of, equity, right? And sometimes expatriates will ask themselves, well, as we are moving on, is it best to sell or do we hold on to this? What is what are the prospects of this appreciating while we are sent halfway around the globe? Is that some of the advisory work that your firm does as well? And what are special considerations that expatriates want to think about when going abroad?
I think expats, they collect bank accounts like everyone else collects baseball cards. So they go from one country to the next. They never get around to closing things down. And it's amazing. We had one client who had 7 bank accounts in 7 countries. And, I said, why? And he's like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. Until we worked out he's paying about $6,000 a year in account fees that he wasn't, aware of until we consolidated the whole lot. To me, when you become an expat, there are a lot of complications in managing your finances, because one thing we know for certain is change is a constant with expats. They're always going on to their next job, and we like to refer to our clients as satellites. They just tend to orbit the world. They just don't really settle down anywhere. They've gone from here 2 years to 5 years and what we always talk about is you want to accumulate wealth in the country you intend to return to or retire to, because then when it comes time to move back to wherever home is, the assets are there waiting for you. And we talk about the three key risks when it comes to managing your money. Currency risk is number one, sovereignty risk is number two, and liquidity risk is number three. So currency risk, and there's a classic example of two clients of ours. They're in the UK, just about to move back to Australia in 2015, and this little vote happened called Brexit. And at that time, they were holding all of their wealth in sterling, and sterling fell 15%, and they had to defer moving back to Australia for 2 years because the financial haircut was too large to take. And Murphy's Law always pops his head up at the worst possible time. The second one is sovereignty risk. In a place like the Middle East here, from a geopolitical point of view, it can get pretty rock and roll at times. Something happens, you just want to make your way to the airport. You don't want to be on your app trying to transfer assets and trying to move things around. You want to just get on that plane and get to the safest destination possible. And the last one is liquidity risk. Liquidity risk is we always talk about it, but COVID has been the biggest example of why liquidity is an important asset. People are losing their jobs. People are having to move countries. People are paying exorbitant fees for airfares. They need to put their hands on their assets and be able to get access to those funds during the most difficult times, not when things are all going well. And by having those assets in a domicile that you understand that you can get access to those funds, it makes a lot of these problems go away. Everything else sort of filters down from there. But those are probably the three key things that we see people struggle with the most, but they can be quite easily navigated.
Right. Do you find when it comes back to the people that are obviously a lot of these people we're working with are working with companies that they're being sent on behalf of. Do you find that their companies are doing enough to engage people like you and or at least be open to having conversations? They're not? No.
I think to me it's more of a tick box exercise. If a company assigns one of their employees overseas, they may have KPMG, EY give them a briefing, which will virtually say, g'day Brett, g'day Christian. We understand you're moving to Denmark. Here is the local tax rules. Here is how this place works. Best of luck. Signed off by an associate and 2 pages of disclaimers. There's really no. We talk about understanding the financial ramifications of that relocation. That's the biggest thing we see. How does it affect the tax status of your house? How does it affect the tax status of your pension? How does that affect the tax status of your investment account? If you have student debt, are there any complications? There's a myriad of things that do come out. And we often find that people come to us with these accounting reports and they go, I'm more confused than I was to start with. So that's one of where we come in. We do a whole what we call statement of advice. Okay, are you aware of if you sold this property while you're overseas, you will pay tax, capital gains tax, in perpetuity. There's all these sort of things, and everyone's different. There is no cookie cutter scenario for every expat going overseas. So we would love companies to do more. The biggest thing we often see is, and I can't remember the exact numbers. You guys might know them better than I do, but a reason for an expatriation failing due to finances is huge. It's something like 40%.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the only one that tops that is relationship, and everything else is quite small after that. So to me, you don't know what you don't know when you're moving overseas. And if you can expect and anticipate things psychologically, you're better prepared to deal with that, as opposed to here we are, we've gone through, and I've watched you guys for a long time now, and you do talk about some great topics about psychology of moving to different countries and how that works. I mean, it is a culture shock. It is a massive culture shock.
Yeah.
You don't want the hassle of your Australian assets being chucked on top of that. You want to turn up in a new country and watch your kids settle in and set up your bank accounts and find where the local supermarkets are, and then not being hit with a tax bill because you did something that you thought was the right thing, but you're not realizing the ramifications of that move. So we would love companies to do a lot more. There's a lot more to it, especially in the US.
Now, when you become part of the checking boxes exercise, are you engaged with relocation management groups that farm out some of these expatriate services? So would you be part of a big box offering that some of these service providers put together, or do you come into the story because somebody, an expatriate, fell on their financial face and said, I don't want to have this any longer, I need some professional help with this?
Unfortunately, I would say 80% of people find us about a year into that move. And we haven't invented a time machine yet, so quite often we can't go back and fix things in the past. There's always better outcomes that can be achieved by doing things before you move. There are certainly things we can do post that move as well too. But for us, it's that great thing called Google. People they'll talk to a relocation firm, or they'll talk to an accounting firm and just walk away more confused, and they'll just jump on Google and ask that question. And that's how probably 95% of our clients find us. We don't have offices in Moldova and Mongolia and Kazakhstan and stuff like that. People get there and they go, I just don't think this applies to me. Whereas that's been our saving grace. Atlas could not exist 20 years ago because the platforms weren't there. That conduit wasn't there to find that. But I've always said we would love to get at the start. When you get at the start, you can get some amazing outcomes and really smooth out the waves when it comes to making sure that move is a positive thing, both professionally, financially, and emotionally.
Yeah,
it's interesting how that's a common theme. I mean, we might work with people that are leaving for their assignment to go overseas. We also work with people that are coming home. And in that situation, we're always saying, it would be great to get 6 months ahead of this, get into the planning phase of this rather than do it retrospectively. We've got we've got Brent, a good friend, Brent up in Canada, who has answered the question properly. You get the T-shirt. Thank you very much, Brent.
Once it's made, don't overpromise, Brett.
and also the question from Brent, thank you very much, is what impact does COVID-19 travel restrictions, the actual travel restrictions, which is an interesting point, right? Because you may be people might have been up against a deadline financially in terms of their move and that kind of thing, and so that strategically the move back home or the move overseas was already set. And now we're in the situation where some people just can't move. So are you coming across that?
We're coming across it on both sides. So there are those where companies move their employees back, in our case, to Australia. So we had a number of clients who work for the big, the Exxons, the Chevrons of the world, who have operations throughout Africa. And obviously the companies weren't confident that the local countries and jurisdictions were handling it well. So they actually got the whole family out and sent them back to Australia. The ATO, from the Australian perspective, were quite good in that. They sort of understood that they're not back there for work reasons, they're back there from a safety point of view. So it didn't automatically trigger them to be a resident for tax purposes. However, after about 6 months, the ATO said, okay, borders now reopen, we can start to travel again. If you stay much longer, you will be considered an Australian tax resident, which would have tax consequences on that. Also, to a lot of countries, including the Middle East, your residency is tied to your work visa. So if you were to lose your job, you might have 1-2 months to be able to get out of the country. And if you've got cars and houses and dogs and all those sort of things, it makes it very difficult. But from a financial planning perspective, the biggest one we found was when we're talking about repatriation, we use 6 to 12 months in terms of timing of when assets get transferred back to not create complications and so on and so forth. You lose that ability when when you're suddenly told you have to move back to Australia in 30 days because you're no longer legally allowed to live here. So that was a big one. And we've had, especially a lot of the airlines, they have what they call provident funds, which with the way that they're structured, you don't want to necessarily arrive back in the country the same tax year that you redeem these funds. We tend to straddle 2 financial years for that reason. Look, it's been a real eye-opener. It really has opened up a lot of the pain points in terms of general things that we can avoid. But sometimes when the chronology is taken out of your control, then you're mitigating the circumstances as opposed to trying to avoid them totally.
Great. So let me ask you then two pointed questions. So typically I would ask you, so what's the number one advice you give a future expat when it comes to personal financial planning? But I will piggyback a second question on it. What would be your number one advice for a prospective repatriate who is now potentially in limbo and waiting for their next move or their return as it becomes possible for them during this health pandemic? So what will be your number one advice on either side as it comes to financial planning?
To me, before you go, every country is different. I think a lot of people just assume that it's the same tax rules, and it's a crazy thing to say, but they just assume that just things carry on.
Mhm.
And if you go to say Dubai versus Denmark, you'll have completely different outcomes. So always research, the country you're moving to. Google's an amazing thing. There is just untold assets and libraries on there of just complicated things, and people have written numerous blogs and articles and everything, and you can data mine these things. How my parents moved to Tucson, Arizona in 1976 is beyond me. They're just off they went. These days, people Google, TripAdvisor for looking at reviews of, restaurants. So while you're doing that, just spend the extra 10, 20 minutes, half an hour, and just seeing what that other side of that landscape looks like. Because we talk about it is two-dimensional financial advice, where you're coming from and where you're going to. Coming back, either repatriating back to your home country or moving to another country, same process again. A lot of expats have been overseas for many years. And guess what? The IRS and the ATO and all the other HMRC, they haven't stayed the same since you left. So quite often there are moving changes there as well too. So you need to do the same in reverse. And we always talk about, change that constant that you can't predict. And, even the best laid plans get thrown out, from time to time. We had clients in San Francisco who we spent 12 months preparing a repatriation. They've been in the US for 18 years. And at the 11th hour, they pulled the pin and decided to stay in San Francisco. This was about 2 years ago. And I said, why? And I said, well, our daughters were born in San Francisco. They want to stay in the United States, and we want to see grandkids. So guess what? We're just going to throw all that planning out the door because we want to spend time with our grandkids. So it's not always about the money, the emotional side. And we always talk to clients about it has to feel good. You don't want to be lying in bed at 10:30 on a Tuesday night going, oh, why did I do that for? These things have to be for a positive reason. They give you a lot of affirmation.
Nice.
Yeah, you mentioned culture shock or culture impact before, where I think those numbers are telling, right? I would often say to a client that the impact of having a spouse or themselves be emotionally brought down, and the potential for that to cause the failure of the expat assignment is huge. It is almost kind of, some people, I describe it when I went through it as a grief process. It's you're absolutely discombobulated, and then so in the clear light of day, it's hard. Just like you would lose another person in your life, through death or other separation. We have financial considerations in those, and often grief counsellors will say, let these issues lie. Do the minimum you can to keep the assets safe and secure, but don't make any huge decisions when you're under the stress of culture, of the stress of culture impact and right. The transition. So that's interesting that percentage you mentioned is no doubt probably also related. Emotion, stress over money can compound emotional stress and vice versa. And,
money's the biggest cause of divorce. And I think what we often find is when you backtrack through a problem that an expat is experiencing, it was always there, but an overseas assignment combined with the stress of that assignment can just drive a wedge in that crack, and just suddenly that whole thing becomes a massive thing. People themselves say, I'm not myself. I'm not myself. I know as an Australian expat right now, it feels weird that we cannot return back to Australia, and all, friends, family, clients, feel the same way. Coming out of Dubai at the moment, if I wanted to get back to Australia, the earliest I could get back is around February, March of next year. And it would have cost me 10,000 Australian dollars for a one-way ticket per person.
Yeah.
So in actual fact, it's cheaper probably to jump on one of those container ships. You can rent the bedrooms. At least they're back in Australia in 30 days. I could probably jump on one of those. So what we're finding is because people are feeling angst about not being able to visit family for Christmas, it's actually propagating out into other areas, and finances is one of those too. So, we're now counselling as much as we're advising.
Same as our work, kind of. Right?
Yeah.
As you did the discussion with Brent last night about how much we cross that line from sometimes marriage counsellor to a therapist, and really people think we're turning up to talk about the culture, right? They're going to, which is important, and that's a big part of it. But much of it is just from our experience and the things that we've gone through, just saying, just understand this is an impactful time of your life. You're changing the trajectory of your family, you're changing your family tree, and at that same time, you're also doing it financially.
Yeah. I mean, like it or not, finances are part of our lives. And as much as people like to put their heads in the sand, and because that, it's not that they don't have time to deal with it, they just don't want to deal with it. And I've got to say, out of COVID, one of the positive things is a number of people have actually used this time to get on top of their finances. People have come to us saying, look, I've been having a great time for the last 3 years, but always said I should do something about it. But now I've been furloughed or laid off, or, people said I've had 3 months to actually, look at the dots on the wall and, that free space or that free thought time to actually work on me, as opposed to, working like a dog, for my job, which most expats do. They work very, very hard. So there are positives that have come out of COVID, but there's also a lot of stresses and that have come out as well too.
Right.
Well, I'm glad there are people like you who help the overwhelmed expatriates tackle some of these issues when they're ready to be counseled or advised, or as they say, the teacher will appear when the student is ready, right? So, and sometimes the student will be ready at a later time, and the teacher will remind them of the lessons they coulda, shoulda learned maybe a year ago. But I don't want to belittle this, because Brett and I, we know this in our world, that a lot of our clients come to us when it's hurting, when the pain has become insufferable. And it's easy to say, well, told you so. You could have come to me a year before that, and we could have mitigated a lot of that. But hindsight, we're always 20/20. And in hindsight, this year of 2020 will have taught us something as well. And I think it's, even if we start late, at least we get a start, right? We need to look at how we manage our funds, or how we manage our finances, no matter where in the world we are. I think this was very insightful, Brett, and I think not enough people in the global mobility world are aware of the valuable services that companies like yours provide.
No, thank you. I think it's something that unfortunately we get more publicity with people going through the pain. That makes sense. We don't want to grow our business on people having to come to us because they're suffering financially, emotionally, whatever those reasons might be. But we often find that hopefully through, especially 2020, has highlighted a lot of pain points, which we've been aware of for many, many years, but it's really brought home those points. And we do see changes in global mobility policy. I think when it comes to occupational health and safety and all those sort of considerations, finances need to be one of those, because I can tell you right now, people can cope with chopping a finger off or those sort of things, but when it comes to being audited by the IRS or the ATO, I think they'd rather chop a finger off.
Yeah, they'll put you away for life, and then you can sing behind bars, money, money, money. Oh, actually, we have a bar right here. See that? I'm holding on to it. Oh man. Money episode. All right, this was lovely, folks.
I think, and also one point to leave it on as well too. Just on another thing is, governments are now sitting on record debt. So it sounds cute when I say this compared to US examples, but the Australian federal government's going to have over $1 trillion worth of debt in the year 2024-25. Now, the Australian economy is 1.7% of the world economy. US, their debt levels are even more extraordinarily higher, and a lot of countries in the same position. So we are going to see tax reform. We are going to see the non-sexy side of stuff that expats are going to have to deal with, and they are going to have to pay attention to it, because there are going to be some pretty large unintended consequences or intended consequences that may pursue.
Oh yeah, I think I think people are still too caught up with the present threat of the pandemic, and a lot of governments are doing things to alleviate the financial burden that has evolved over this year. And they're doing this not with money that they have stored away in the vault. They're printing money, and they're going to want it back, and it's
got to pay the piper at some point.
We're going to pay somehow down the road. Just let's not get too comfortable around that. Yeah.
No, exactly. And look, I think it's going to be something that US is the US voting. Expats are a voting part of the US elections. Unfortunately, Australia, we don't. So they can pass through legislation, and we can't revolt by voting them out of office, because we don't actually get the opportunity to vote anyway. So that's always another consideration as well for expats. You are the silent majority a lot of the time, even for expats who can vote. These FATCA deals, they're incredibly punitive, but people in Capitol Hill, they just do what they want to do.
Mm. That's I think a whole new series, Brett, we should start about things that people in Capitol want to do. That's a whole culture.
I'll start one for Canberra.
Absolutely, be dueling shows. Yeah, well, that's great. So where do we find you, Brett? What's the website for Atlas?
Pretty easy. www, all the W's, .atlaswealth.com. So we've got a pretty simple name. We're globally minded, hence the reason for the name. But we're on social media.
World and you shop like Atlas, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's right, actually. Yeah. So we're on the representative socials. Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Got a pretty poor showing on Instagram, so if you want to look at a couple of photos of the office, go for there. But where our broadcast channels are primarily LinkedIn and Facebook, and obviously our website, which it's still boggles the mind when I look at Google Analytics, where people are reading our articles and those sort of information from. But we try and be the conduit information, because we know that the federal governments do a very poor job in communicating with expats. So when we see stuff, we do watch the IRS and the ATO on a daily basis. I don't recommend it; it's pretty boring. But if we do see something that does affect our clients, we like to let people know within 24 to 48 hours, because I don't know how governments expect expats to learn about these changes, osmosis, ESP. But from our point of view, we need to have that sort of broadcast capability just to let them know. I mean, they can go, okay, it's great, and not act on it. That's fine. But to quote our friend, Donald Rumsfeld, there's the known known, and the known unknowns, the unknown unknowns, and half the stuff that expats have to deal with are the unknown unknowns.
True that. I agree.
Cool.
Well, thanks for taking time. You can put your necktie back on and go all professional wealth management now, and the casual part of your day is over, Ned.
Fantastic. I'm not wearing board shorts, by the way, so I'm not. I'm actually wearing a full suit.
Well, thanks to the two Bretts, and the two Chaps are out for now. Join us back again tomorrow.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.